Hey everyone, hi, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing something that I do in my private life. I've done a couple videos like this, but now I'm doing it on the internet and I'm so excited about it. Hopefully this will be a video that turns into a very small series in which I judge BookTubers' favorite books of 2024. Woo! Maybe I'll go on to also read some of BookTubers' favorite books of 2024, but right now we're focusing on the judging. I love finding out what people loved for, what books stood out to them in their reading year and whether I've also read them. I tend to, I don't know, I just like finding that commonality or finding that common thread between me and another booktuber. So I'm so excited to take you on this journey with me. So if you're new to my channel, then hi, I'm Shelly. I love books and reading, and I love talking about people who also love books and reading. It's a very convoluted thing over here, but if you're liking the vibe, please subscribe. And without any further rambling on, let's go ahead and get into the meat of this video. Angela from Angela's Bookcase is a wonderful Australian booktuber. She's wonderful because she has such a huge variety in her reading. She reads backlisted titles, nature writing, memoirs, children's literature, classics, and I love that, and it's really reflected in her end of the year video as well.
I had a theme of books this year of women going through hard stuff in their life and finding respite and relief and answers in nature, and this was one of those books. H is for Hawk by Helen Macdonald.
Now Macdonald does this beautiful thing, and Angela says this too, is that Macdonald blends three things. It is her experience being a falconer for the first time and documenting what that is like and her connection with this bird. She also talks about a writer who was also a falconer, T.H. White, who is most known for his book, The Once and Future King, but had wrote a memoir about his experience as a falconer. And she is comparing and meditating and learning more about his experience in his life. But she's also grieving the death of her father. And the blend of these three things made this book magical, and her writing is spectacular. Truly a spectacular and unusual read. Book Chat with Pat. She is a wonderful booktuber, smart, articulate, and very thoughtful about what she says about books. And I think this is probably because she was a teacher for a long time, and she even has a series of books she loved to teach, which is a phenomenal series because she just has so much insight about the literature she's talking about. And then you feel the passion that she has for the book because she obviously loved teaching it. And then she can also give you insight as to why she loved teaching it, whether the students responded in very polarizing ways or in a very positive way, or whether there was a lot of deep conversations around that piece of literature or not. Phenomenal person. Go subscribe to all these people, okay? So let's see what Pat loved.
Coming in at number 10 is Daniel Mason's North Woods. This is the novel that really follows a house through several centuries, and we come to know all of the different inhabitants of the house throughout time.
This book is doing two fascinating things. First of all, it's focusing on a single plot of land, and Daniel Mason flexes his writing muscles by changing his writing style with every story or with every section in this novel. So there's poetry and romanticism, like very romantic writing. There's even some like crime thriller sections. And we see this plot of land and the people who lived on it through centuries. Interestingly, I read this with a book club, and the people who love it felt like it was a continuous story. They read it as one continuous story that had dramatic style changes, like stylized writing changes throughout. Interestingly, the people who liked it less, me and a friend of mine, we read it like short stories that were interconnected through some of the themes and through the fact that they were all told on or with the same setting. And it was interesting to get that takeaway. Those who read it, myself and a friend who read it as if they were interconnected short stories, liked it less than those who read it as one continuous novel. I wonder if Pat read it as one continuous novel, and if that contributed, if that changed her reading experience at all. I'm gonna make a prediction right now. I think the most popular book I'm gonna see in all of these lists is going to be James. So I'll have a little James counter underneath by Percival Everett. I think it's gonna make a lot of people's top 10, and so I'm gonna leave it as like a little count below. Pat's next book is James, the infamous and now famous retelling of Huckleberry Finn by Percival Everett. Love this book. Absolutely agree with her. Jo Spivey. Jo is so sharp. I am jealous of just how bright and articulate Jo is. Truly a phenomenal booktuber. I just love listening to him talk. He's one of those whose mind is definitely working a lot quicker than my own, and can just really spew out exactly what he means and do it at a rapid rate of speed, which I absolutely appreciate.
But yeah, this is George Eliot's Middlemarch, which is, I think, the finest book written in the English language. I have not read one that betters it, although I'm going to devote the next 4 or 5 decades to finding out if there is indeed a better English language novel out there.
Oh my gosh, I love this book. This was my favorite book, I think, of last year, and it is it's a phenomenal book. It is about a small provincial town and all of the people in it and all of the drama in their lives, which is it's so tangibly real. The drama, what they're going through, the humanity, the nuance of our human character, our spirits, the way that we carry things, the decisions that we make. It is so painfully real at times that and it's not a sad book, but I sobbed while reading it. But also her sentences are beautifully written. The character dynamics are absolutely gorgeous. I adore this book. And so, Jo, you have moved up in my estimation because you love this book as well. Pajama Shelley, Editing Shelley. Okay, so Scott's video is all of his 5-star reads, which he just runs through almost like a slideshow with music in the background. So I'm not including him. I don't include any of his dialogue about the books, partly because I know that he's going to gush about them, and then also partly because the video itself doesn't have any dialogue. Okay, just wanted to give you that context. Scott, my frenemy, my friend and enemy. Scott. Oh, gracious. When we love a book, we love it so much. We love it with every passion and fiber of our being. And the exact passion that we have for the love of the books that we have in common, we also have for the books that we don't have in common. Books that he loves, I cannot stand, and books that I've loved, he thinks are just petulant and awful.
Shelley, my personal booktube nemesis, my booktube frenemy, who recommends The Dutch House by Anne Patchett. Shelley and I are opposites. We don't agree on much. So you might wonder, why, when there are literally thousands of creators out there, did you pick a creator with pretty questionable bookish taste? And that's because Shelley and I do actually agree on a few things, like reading and creating videos about books, or Middlemarch.
And so it's funny to have this true, I don't know, this very up and down relationship with somebody on BookTube, because it's just hilarious in where we overlap, and then it's also where we just are absolute opposites on. So he put up a video, the 42 5-star reads that he's read this year so far, and I'm gonna go through that now. The very first book is I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. I read this last year. It is a dystopian book about women who are being held captive in a bunker, and the voice of our narrator is somebody who doesn't understand or doesn't realize the world that has been lived out. She doesn't know a world outside of this bunker. So she only knows this very constrained environment. About halfway through, the vibe of the novel very much changes, and it's really fascinating. It's doing the thing that I love about with science fiction or any kind of dystopian or even fantasy books, where you put a really fascinating thought experiment at the center of it all, and you explore a lot of its facets. And that is exactly what Hartman does. And it has this somewhat bleak and somber tone, but it worked beautifully. It's a book that will stick with you. So I'm not surprised that Scott liked it. Well, I am surprised because I liked it. So he liked it. I don't know. I'm surprised. Scott also liked My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante, which is a translated Italian novel. I'm surprised because, well, I don't know. Am I surprised? I don't know. I really like this novel. I would have thought Scott would have thought it was too sentimental or something. But it is essentially about friends living up in a really, really tiny and poor neighborhood in Italy. And it shows like they're friends, they're frenemies. It's about memory, it's about female friendship, it's about poverty, and it is, I don't know, I was wrapped up. I was truly wrapped up in this story. And it has had very significant personal meaning for me. But I'm also, I don't know, why I cannot really articulate why I'm so surprised Scott liked it. I just honestly would have thought that I think I just could see him critiquing it. So it's a wonderful surprise for me. Oh, Scott. His next book is Ordinary Human Feelings by Megan Nolan. This made it to my worst books of the year. Do you see the pattern? It's like when something hits for both of us, it hits hard. But this, oh gosh. So this book got, some notoriety because it was on the long list for the Women's Prize for Fiction. A murder happens in a neighborhood. There is a reporter who's very interested in it, and the murder is pinned on an immigrant family, or an immigrant family is suspected of this murder. And, and then it starts to delve into the backstory of this family who a lot of the guilt is being pinned on. I just didn't like it. I thought it was forgettable. I thought it was kind of boring, really poorly executed. I did not like it. Oh, another book that I cannot stand. I can't believe it. This made it into, I should have known. Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. This is about a female photographer seeking revenge in very creative and disturbing ways. She is definitely unhinged. It's definitely a book that falls in the unhinged woman category. And the thing is that it is an interesting book, but it's so poorly executed. It is just rough. It's almost like she didn't have an editor and she really needed one just to tighten everything up. And it was also one of the few books that I read that made me actually feel kind of icky after I read it, because some of the scenes in there were just so off-putting, just so off-putting. Another book that made it to my worst books of the year, The Safekeep by Yael van der Woten. This was longlisted for the Booker. It is about a woman who has a house guest sort of bestowed upon her against her will, who ends up being very suspicious of this house guest, and then it turns into this very it turns into something a lot steamier and a lot it is a lot. It is the definition of over egging the pudding, quite literally. To some of the scenes I was just like, wow, and I'm not a prude, okay? I know people think that I am, but I am not. But I will say that just the way the story was going, and then the left turn we take, and then the turn just decides to really go downhill from there. And it was not good. Sarah from Freshly Read Books. She has such a wonderful energy about her. She has her own sarcasm and humor, and I love that she does her video standing up. I don't hardly ever do my video standing up, but maybe I should, and be inspired by her because she always says that. And her favorite book one of them was War and Peace.
And then coming in at number 8 is a big one. It's War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. This one is translated by Anthony Briggs. And so these two total separate, War and Peace are separate at the beginning and then slowly bleed into each other as the book goes on.
War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. Now this is a book that it's a historical fiction work depicting a time in Russia when the Napoleonic Wars were happening. and the invasion when Napoleon invaded Russia. And that is the thrust of the book. We have also time on the battlefield, as you would imagine, war, and then peace, like time during in the city where they're further away from danger. And it's good. There's a lot of great characters. It has stuck with me more than I thought, especially Tolstoy's very cinematic writing, which I don't think is talked about enough on BookTube. Often we talk about the letters, the notes, the essays he inserts in between certain sections where he is theorizing, sort of speculating on who gets to write history, and it's the questions that he has amid all of that central premise. I think that gets a lot of talk, but nobody really talks about just how incredibly cinematic some of his writing and some of his scenes are. It's just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I can see why it made her top 10. Gavin from Gavin Reads It All. I enjoy Gavin's sense of humor. Super creative with his videos, and I really enjoyed, he did like a moving series recently, and I really liked the way that he was trying to like puzzle out where to put everything. I really, really enjoyed that. So let's see what Gavin and I have in common. Gavin did 24 favorite books of 2024, and he starts with 24. We're all the way up to 8, and that's when I finally get a book that I've read the same book as him. I know what he's talking about. And he picks the Raven Boys series by Maggie Stiefvater.
And number 8 is the Ravencycle series by Maggie Stiefvater. But I mean like the Ravencycle series as a whole, the reading experience, and just all of it, just the entire story. One of my favorites of the year.
I enjoyed this, although I don't know why there is so much hype around this. I thought it was a solid series. It's good, it's enjoyable, and you know, like I enjoyed my reading experience with it and reading all 4 books. The friendship is really sweet. Maybe I should reread it. I don't know. But I thought it was good but not great. And anyway, sometimes I think I'm wrong when someone like Gavin really likes something and I'm like, I just thought it was fine, but I didn't love it.
And number 3 is Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. This was my very first 5-star read of the year. That wasn't a reread and wasn't a manga. So the fact that this was my first true 5-star of the year, and it's number 3, blows me away.
I read this ages ago, and I must reread it. I read it when it was huge on BookTube, like over 10 years ago. It's probably closer to like 12 years ago. This book was getting so much hype on BookTube, and I read it then, but I was also getting burned out of reading, and so I don't think I gave it the time and attention that it was warranted. I remember liking it but not loving it, which seems to be now a pattern with Gavin and I.
The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. This was a reread, technically. 5 stars, 5 stars, 5 stars. The reading experience itself was so incredibly magical to me.
This is a fantastic book to end on, and for this to be Gavin's number 1. It's a classic of the fantasy genre. Tolkien's writing is second to none. My husband is actually reading The Hobbit to our children right now at bedtime, and it's like I'm hearing parts of The Hobbit, and you realize just what a brilliant and incredible writer Tolkien is. His wordplay, his characters, the setting, the atmosphere. And it's interesting because Gavin said that this was a reread for him. And on the first time he read it, it was all 4 stars. But this time around, he absolutely loved it. And I think a lot of it for him was, I think sometimes it does take twice. It does take you a couple of times to read Tolkien to really understand his talent, his brilliance, the way he writes, the registers that he writes in. They're all just such genius and so phenomenal. And I am not surprised the first time he read it, it was like 4 stars. Whereas like the second time he read it, it's this 5-star read, because I do think that sometimes it takes that from reading it. That it's better on a reread. It's better when you're familiar with it. But I'm also really excited that this made its number 1, because then I gotta talk about it. Hannah from A Clockwork Reader. Now, Hannah usually reads fantasy, and I thought maybe I won't have anything in common, but I do see something that we have in common. already.
Most of the time, my favorites end up being books that profoundly moved me in some way or are so different from anything I've ever read that they just really stuck with me and I think about them all the time. But they also just have to have some element to them that feels deeply personal to me. Not that I have to relate to it, but just that something about it really sticks with me in some way. And that is what this next book is, and you'll be able to tell what it is and why. But that is, of course, Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice.
Anne Rice really made vampires sexy. You know, she was like, they're dark and they are, you know, beautiful, and she really set off that trend with vampires. I think previously vampires were mysterious but also scary and villainous, and then now we're like, the soft vampire has appeared, and Anne Rice has a lot to do with that. I read Interview with a Vampire with both my husband and a really good friend of mine, and we had a great time reading it. It is about a vampire interviewing, like he's being interviewed, but about the story of his entire existence. And you see the vampire through the centuries and the different relationships that he has. He's brooding, he's melancholy, it's very atmospheric, it's very melodramatic, but it works so well. And I really enjoyed this. I look back on this book very fondly.
This is by far the trippiest book I have ever read in my entire life. That is probably the most accurate way I could describe it. Similarly to how I felt about Rouge, where the main character is actually hallucinating, you also feel like you're in a dream.
Everyone says that it's the weirdest book that they've read. Vita Nostra. It is the weirdest book that they've ever read. And that might well be true for me as well. It is dark academia flipped on its head. It really is about a young woman who gets invited but also coerced to go to this magic school. She's pressured, she can't leave. And it is about just the oddity of it all, but also it's at the heart of it, it's about transformation and achieving things that you didn't think you could or would achieve, and connections to others. But overall, even though those were some of the themes embedded in it, it is just the weirdest. It is the weirdest book I've ever read, I think. And some scenes definitely stand out in my mind.
I genuinely thought this was like a Greek myth retelling or something before I started reading this book, so I was in for a complete surprise, because while it has references to Greek mythology and other things, it's not actually a retelling or anything like that, but it feels like its own fairy tale. This is a perfect book to me in the sense that it feels exactly how I want to feel while I read a book.
Piranesi, Piranesi, Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This is a fantastic book. This is what Clarke has proven that she does best, which is a truly fantastical story that keeps the reader engaged because you want to uncover and understand more about the world, just like the fantasy of the world, just like many of the characters do. It's like, how far is she going to push the magic? Because it could very easily be rooted in our everyday world and in our everyday lives. And with Piranesi in particular, we're following this character who is really unsure as to what he's doing in this house, in this palace that seems to be labyrinthy and almost endless, and also has a lot of statues. And so as you're observing and learning more, you know, it's like we have almost this innocence that the person we're following has. There's this unsure of what exactly is going on, which is exactly the experience the protagonist is happening. And so as you're figuring it all out and as everything starts to click together, it becomes an incredibly satisfying read. All right, well, that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here and spending this time with me. Let me know, have you read any of these books? Do you like them? Would they have made your top 10? I want to know. Leave all of the comments and such down below. I would really appreciate that. And I will see you all in my next one. Bye!